Hello.
Thank you.
Hi, Helen.
Hello.
You haven't been here every week, have you? Helen?
Yes, Helen Cunningham. Yes, I have.
No, Helen Greaves. I'm
No,
sorry.
I haven't.
It's good to see you.
Wasn't sure how many weeks I was supposed to do, Adrian, but I've joined in now.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, you are very welcome. Sorry to have kept you waiting. You'll gather we've had just a little hitch with the live stream this evening. But for those of us that are truly live, that won't be a problem at all.
No.
Hi, Jenny.
Fine.
I can't believe that we've got to week 10 of this series. Saying to Adrian that this second part seems to be whizzing by very, very quickly.
Yep.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening,
Welcome.
Jim.
Good
Good
evening.
to see you.
Evening, Gabriella.
Good evening.
Good to see you.
Yes, it's good to be there. Hope you don't mind I gate crushed because I'm no longer in your learning district.
We are so widespread in this meeting. I think we've got all the way from Scotland to Jersey. So
Oh, wow.
I'm sure you're somewhere between that.
So where are you, Gabrielle?
I'm in Lincolnshire now.
Oh, very good.
Hi, Kate.
Our
Hi,
reach
Gabriella.
is spreading.
We're in the same district.
Hello, Kate.
Hiya.
Kate's been with us
Oh,
before.
hello, Kate.
Hiya. Good to see you.
Get in. Never mind.
Sorry, folks, we've still got people joining us, so let them in.
Watch that afterwards.
Right.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. It's all right. Oh, that's here. That's his work. Technical. What?
We can't see anybody.
That's how. Oh, that you mean?
Yeah.
Good evening, Ruth and Margaret. I've seen you on the screen.
Can't see Tricia.
No,
Oh.
no sign of it.
I'm here somewhere. There you go. I turned the camera off.
It's not seeing Barbara.
There we go. Well, we might get the odd person joining us, but let's not delay, because I'm sure that Adrian has lots to get through. I seem to think thinks he's got 2 minutes in hand from a previous week somewhere. So not giving him too much leeway of starting. Adrian, it's a delight to have you leading us again this evening. Thank you so much for all you do in sharing what you know and have learned, and your passion for this gospel. It really is such a delight to come week by week and hear another chunk of your learning to share with us and looking at yet another passage. So thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. It's good to be here. It's wonderful to be here and good to have made this journey as far as we've made it, as we've journeyed with Mark, with Jesus, with the disciples, in what is really our own journey of discipleship as well. And I think we've followed the story of trying to be faithful to God and following Jesus, and found out that the story of discipleship is deeply about our faith in Jesus Christ. I've got these slides. They're always in the beginning. You know exactly what they say, but I just want to tell you all over again. So here we go quickly. Context and genre, the two keys that we need to be most mindful of with any piece of text. Context determines meaning, genre determines the appropriate response. Gospel is a genre, a particular genre, a particular type of writing. It is not biography, it contains biography, but it's not biography. It's not history, but it contains history. It includes everything that we need to know except those cultural things that Mark took for granted. And he's written it with a purpose in mind. And as such, every detail he puts in the story is important. You'll never hear me say that's unimportant. You might hear me say, I don't know or I don't understand, but I know that every detail in the story is important to the point that Mark is making as he tells it. So the key question in gospel writing is always to ask, what does it mean? What does the text mean? What is it trying to say to us? What does it mean about Jesus? What does it mean about God? What does it mean about being a disciple? This is the map of where everything happens, but we've come so far in the story that all of what's left really happens in Jerusalem, or just outside. Honor and shame are still a key part of understanding what is happening in their culture and in the story as we read it. And here we go. So I really want to get to the end of chapter 13 today, and we're only sort of right at the end of chapter 11. So it's quite a bit for one night, but I think we're going to do it okay, because there's some bits that we'll go over a little bit more quickly because they don't have the same. They're not as they don't appear in the lectionary, and perhaps we can deal with them a little bit quicker. Is that okay? So what are the normal questions that I'm always asking you? What does it say to us? What do we see and hear? What is happening? What does it sound like Mark is saying in the passage? And of course, we're always asking, how does it relate to us today? So Mark chapter 11, starting at verse 27. Again, they came to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders came to him and said, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority to do them? And Jesus said to them, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I'll tell you by what authority I do these things. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin? Answer me. And they argued with one another. They said, if we say from heaven, he'll say, then why didn't you believe him? But should we say of human origin? Well, they were afraid of the crowd, for all regarded John as truly a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we don't know. And Jesus said to them, then neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. Then he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to his tenants and went to another country. And when the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants to collect from them his share of the produce of the vineyard. But they seized him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent another slave to them. This one they beat over the head and insulted. And then he sent another, and that one they killed. And so it was with many others. Some they beat and others they killed. He had still one other, a beloved son. And finally he sent him to them, saying, they will respect my son. But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they seized him, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will cut and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. And when they realized that he had told this parable against them, they wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowd. So they left him and went away. The usual questions. What do you see? What do you hear? What sounds unusual? What seems strange?
It's obviously a parable against the leaders of the temple at the time, and their ancestors, really, prophets, and then suddenly the Son of God.
Yeah, so he tells, I mean, Mark tells us this parable is told against them, and it's pretty transparent, isn't it? I mean, it's really clear who the players are in the story and what's happening, and really that the people in the Sanhedrin have taken control of Israel and tried to make it their own possession, when really this is God's country, or this is God's people. So yes, yeah. What else?
Shows Jesus interpreting Old Testament passages and relying on them and bringing new meaning.
Right, as we would expect, yeah.
It seems to me that the parable is answering the question, by what authority are you doing this? And he points them towards the Son of God as the one who comes. Is that fair?
He doesn't say Son of God. What does he say?
Beloved Son.
Beloved Son, yeah, yes. Beloved Son, which is a clear link to that baptism passage. So this is Jesus. You know, I mean, the point has been made. This is Jesus, the beloved Son, and so there is this story that's happening of them rejecting, and there is this kind of prescience of knowing that actually they, in the end, they are going to kill him. Yeah. Anything else?
Is the walking the temple significant? Taking the fight into their domain?
Yeah, so this is back in the temple and back in Jerusalem, and very much, I mean, that's even more important in the next story. Yeah, so there is this confrontation that is happening. Yeah, and he begins this. Again, they came to Jerusalem, verse 27. As he was walking in the temple, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders came to him. And the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders made up what was called the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was his parliament in the land. Sort of, it was the chief political agency in the Roman province. So this was the divested government, in a sense, but there was real power there. It administered the province and administered the finances on behalf of Rome. It was the first court of justice. It was the highest Jewish court of law. And so these are really important, really powerful people, the Jewish state, if you like, who are confronting Jesus and feeling the pressure of this movement that Jesus has created. Yeah.
Did the Sanhedrin have any connection with authorizing rabbis to teach? I'm just reading that again as we haven't given you any authority to do this.
I can't answer. I don't know the answer to that. But you can imagine that in a, I mean, that it might be as you describe. It could also be that it's just them coming sort of like the authorities, whether it's the court or the police or whatever, and just saying, who said you could do this? By what authority? By who gave you permission to do the things that you're doing? So it might not necessarily be tied to a licensing kind of thing. It might just be a policing sort of piece within the Jerusalem. Yeah.
Could it be that they felt that Jesus was in their territory and therefore shouldn't be speaking at all?
Absolutely. They're thinking, I mean, Jesus is this troublemaker from this backwater called Galilee, whose movement has grown and really is confronting the whole of the way that society is put together, whether it's, let's go back to chapter 1, chapter 2, it's the priests, it's the rabbis, it's the scribes, all of these different pillars of society, the the family arrangements, the forgiveness arrangements, all those sort of things are all tied into it. And so there's a massive disruption in the way that society is being administered. And what is happening is that the rich and the powerful, those who walk in the, in the places of power, they're disturbed by it. They're threatened. They didn't mind when things were not absolutely fair, or when some people were walked on or trodden or thrown out. That didn't affect them. But now, if the scales are going to be turned, if justice is going to become the thing, they've got a lot to lose. And so, not here, but elsewhere in the Gospels, we hear the Sanhedrin saying something like, well, look, it's better we just do Jesus in and the nation's okay. It doesn't matter if we do it fairly or unfairly, but, and I think sometimes that's just the way that power deals with problems, perceived problems. Roy has asked, sorry, let me talk to this, read this first. Could I say something about Jesus answering their challenge with another question? Is Jesus saying it's not politically astute for him to claim his authority yet? Certainly there's as the way Mark tells us the story, there's an awareness that there's not a lot of time left. Okay, so there's an awareness that, he's not, I don't get the impression Jesus is delaying for another day, but at the same time that is almost what seems to be happening. So perhaps he is just saying, here and now, this is not the right place. That's why he won't answer their questions directly. Perhaps there's still bits and pieces of work that he's wanting to do, rather than just come out today and say, yeah, well, that's it, and I suppose, so he answers their question with another question, which is kind of, he does it a few times now in the next few bits that we'll read, and it's he does it as a means of not answering not having to answer their questions. I don't know if I've really answered that clearly. I don't know if I can. Someone else was going to ask something?
Adrian, were they testing Jesus, trying to trick him into answering them?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll see now. We're going to read a few more stories, and they're all kind of the same kind of stories. They're all coming to Jesus, and they're saying, we want to find you out. We want to know about you. We want to know what's going on. We're checking you out. And so I don't think he says explicitly here that they were trying to catch him out, but in the next story, it says explicitly they came to trap him. And that word trap is it's like it is in English. It's the trap that you would lay for an animal to ensnare them or something like that. Shall we go on and read it?
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
That's in that passage, it says that they perceived that this parable was told against them.
Verse 12.
But we don't get anything about that they perceived in it that there was a veiled claim to who he is and being the beloved son, the God's son, that this blasphemy in their eyes, was riling them at the time. Is that partly because of the writing that's being left? Mark will pick that up later in the trial, or maybe that hasn't occurred to them yet.
I don't think it's critical to the way Mark's telling the story. I think their real fears about Jesus were not that he might perhaps say something about God that was wrong and was blasphemy, and they wouldn't like that very much and be offended by that. Their fears about Jesus were that what he was saying about God and what God was doing was changing the way that the world was working. It was undermining the unjust power that they held. It was shining a light on them, which revealed some of the darkness and the evil in the decisions and the laws and that sort of thing. And I think that's what they were afraid of. Rome, the Roman Empire, just as a similar kind of story, it had its own gods and declared its Caesar's gods and that sort of thing. But it was never really worried about other people having other gods. So long as they submitted to the Roman way of living and showed that by offering sacrifices to the Roman gods as such. And so people on the whole don't get too riled up about abstract religion. It's when it actually hits home and it means something for me living here in this year that people are saying, oh, hang on, not sure about this, or I don't like that. And I think that's primarily what was happening with the
Thank you.
Pharisees.
Is there a chance that we've got with Mark, right away through the story of Mark, an argument that says that what Jesus was doing and what he was saying was coming across to the authorities as not sort of religious, but anti-religious, that he was in league with the devil. He was breaking the law. He was challenging everything that they stood for, that he couldn't possibly be from God the way he behaved.
It's a great question, Jim. Great question. Actually, Mark deals with it in I think it's chapter 4, and they come to Jesus and they say, by what power do you do these things? And they're saying it's by the power of Beelzebul, the prince of darkness, whatever. And Jesus' answer is, look, I'm not interested in abstract theology. If I'm doing good things, I can't be doing them by the power of the devil, because then the power of the devil's broken because he rules over a divided house. The fact that I'm doing good things means I'm doing godly things. And that would be the standard on which he looked at it. Okay?
It seems to me that what we've got through the passage you've read just now is a crescendo. The challenge, where's your authority, which is a question which occurs repeatedly through Mark's gospel. They're terrified of answering the John the Baptist question, because if they say he was a prophet, then why didn't you follow him? And then Jesus tells in parable form the essence of the Hebrew Bible, the history of the whole nation, and is basically saying you're not just rotten, you're rotten to the core.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. That's that whole parable. And it's not lost on them. I mean, it doesn't take much to interpret that parable. Some of them are a bit harder than that, but that one's pretty clear. Yeah. I am going to go on now, quick, before someone else asks something else. I'm going to screen share and let's go on. Then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but you teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it." And they brought one. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." And Jesus said to them, "Well, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. So the usual questions, what's strange, what's unusual? One of the things that Rome had done was there was a tribute tax, and that it was part of sort of the ruling system, and everyone had to pay to Rome a tribute to Caesar. And it had to be paid with Roman coins, and typically a denarius or another Roman coin would have Caesar's head on the one side and an inscription somewhere on it that said words to the effect, Caesar is God, okay? Caesar Deus, something like that. So if you were Jewish, it was really problematic to even have one of those coins, because this was religious tension for you. And certainly to carry one of those coins into the temple, where there was no imageries of God, there was no attempt to paint a picture or an icon or anything like that. And then to carry a coin like that into the temple would have been really frowned upon. So what's happening in this story? What do we see? What do we hear? What's unusual?
Shows the poverty of Jesus.
Shows the poverty of Jesus, that he doesn't have the coin. Okay.
So I'm just wondering where the coin came from in the first place. Who had it and shouldn't have?
And shouldn't have. So who had it and shouldn't have?
The last story was the religious authorities targeting Jesus. This one is the political power targeting Jesus with the Herodians, and they're targeting him with a political question, trying to get him in trouble with the Roman authorities.
All right, lots of good things there to talk about. I'm going to try and go backwards in a sense. So because you started verse 13, Jenny, Pharisees and Herodians. So Herodians, yeah, these are followers of Herod, political people, part of Herod's support bubble or whatever we're going to call it, okay? But that's not who the Pharisees are. The Pharisees are a Jewish revival movement, if anything. And so these are really diverse people who are coming together with one aim. They found common ground. They didn't like Jesus. They wanted to trap him, to ensnare him as you would an animal. And so they chat him up in verse 14, tell him how wonderful he is and all those kind of things. And then they ask him, they set the trap. And is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Now, if you say we shouldn't pay the taxes to the emperor, well, that's easy. You're in trouble with the emperor, you're in trouble with Rome, kind of end of story. What happens the other way around? If you say, of course we should pay them, then hopefully the Pharisees and Herodians are thinking you're going to lose your popular support because you're going to be saying to the common people, you should be paying your taxes to Rome. So, Joe's question. Why are you putting me to the test? Joe and Margaret, in a sense. Bring me a denarius. So Jesus doesn't have one, hey? Bring me one and let me see it. And someone in the crowd, someone of the Pharisees and the Herodians says, here, hang on, I've got one here. And pulls it out of his wallet, pocket, whatever it was, koffinos. And you can almost hear the people around him like draw in their breath, because here he's carrying this image of Caesar is God in the temple, and it shouldn't be there. Joe said it shouldn't be there. So they bring him one, and Jesus says, whose head is this? Whose title? They say it's the emperor's, and Jesus gives this, again, almost non-answer, but enough of an answer to say he's answered. Give to the emperor the things of the emperor's, and give to God the things that were God's. Now, that's not an easy answer, is it? And I think sometimes we've heard those words used very easily. But I think if we reflect on it for a moment, we might find that sometimes it's quite hard to distinguish between what is God's and what isn't God's. What in your life should you be giving to the emperor, and what in your life should you be giving to God?
Is there something in this about above all powers, above all kings, that Jesus's kingdom, it didn't matter about who was an earthly king?
I'm not sure.
Have we got to
go on?
Have we got to remember that the Pharisees and everybody else has been living under the security of the Romans, maybe harsh living, but they've been protected by the Romans. They've had Roman buildings, so that they have some sort of security, some sort of way of life that they've got to pay something towards.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, can hear someone going around saying, "Oh, what have the Romans ever done for us?" You know. At the same time, the Jewish answer, or part of the Jewish answer, might have been, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." Not sure.
I think it's
yeah, go on.
It's difficult for us to understand how punitive their taxes were. That was what was making the people so very, very poor. The heavy taxations from various bodies. So this was quite a big thing for him to say.
Quite a big thing for him to say that they should pay the taxes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They were so heavy.
But he stops short of saying that in some ways, doesn't he? He's not just saying, "Oh yeah, it's the taxes are there." He's saying, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's."
Yeah. Because the Caesars proclaimed themselves gods, didn't they?
They did.
So it, to my mind, this is about, yeah, they might be earthly gods, but look at your God, the King of Kings.
So there's an interesting thing in verse 16. I think I might have mentioned before, one or two places where there's a word in the gospel that's only used in two places. And this is one of them. And it says there in verse 16, it says, "Whose head is this and whose inscription?" And the only other place in Mark's gospel where that word inscription is used is on the message that they stick on Jesus' cross. And so it really is a case of holding these two, I mean, in Anne's words, the two kings together, or the two kingdoms, and putting them in front of people and saying, who are you going to worship? Who are you going to follow? What are you going to give to God? What are you going to give to your God, maybe? Yeah.
I think it states you have a responsibility to the state as well as to God. As human beings, we live in a state and we do have responsibilities. I think that's what it says to me anyway. Pay your taxes, live by the law, etc.
But you wouldn't do that if the taxation was totally and utterly unjust and inhumane, would you? There's taxes and taxes.
You just don't vote them in again.
I'm going to move on. I don't think there's an easy answer for us here. I think it's one of these things that we have to be permanently uneasy about. We kind of need to make this decision at each step, at each fork in the road, if you like. We're going to make this decision about which is the Jesus path. What do I owe to God in this decision? What do I owe to Caesar in this decision? Sometimes to give Caesar back his coin and say, Caesar, here, have it. might be perfectly the right decision. Yeah, absolutely. Peter, you look like you want to say something.
Sometimes you ask the question, what's missing?
Yes.
And for me, there's always in that sentence been one word missing twice. And for me, at any rate, you've just pointed to it without using the word. I instinctively read this as, give to the emperor the things that are rightly the emperor's, and to God the things that are rightly God's. And if you do that, it's the point you've just made, you have to decide what is rightful.
Okay, you've said that really nicely, better than I did. Thank you. So they're still testing Jesus. And some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to him and asked him a question saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no child, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married, and when he died, left no children. And the second married her and died, leaving no children. And the third likewise, none of the 7 left children. Last of all, the woman herself died. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had married her. And Jesus said to them, is not this the reason you are wrong, that you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God? For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the story about the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's not God of the dead, but of the living. And so you're quite wrong. Anything you notice or want to talk about here? Anything that's strange or unusual?
That's one almighty challenge that Jesus tells them they don't know the scriptures.
Yeah, yeah. What else? It's a pretty straight.
Why
Go
did
on.
the Sadducees ask a question about what will happen when they rise if they don't believe in the resurrection?
Well, I think that, Helen, I think they're trying to make the point that if there is such a thing as resurrection, it's going to be such confusion in heaven that obviously God of order, there can't be this thing called resurrection. I think that's the point.
Okay.
And so they come with this fairly far-fetched story about the wife who had 7 husbands and none of the, and didn't have any children with any of them. And I think that's what they're trying to do in that story, saying, just imagine in the resurrection, so not in heaven, in the resurrection, whose wife is she going to be?
Yeah.
And there's something pretty horrific in that question too, isn't there?
Yeah.
Who is she going to belong to? Whose cooking and cleaning is she going to do? Eh? Or whatever. I mean, it's sort of there in the question. Who's going to own this woman in the resurrection? And that's not far-fetched, because actually this is, just see if my eye can fall on the, where it is. I'll put in the chat later if I don't get it right now. But it's about levirate marriage, okay? And really the idea is that actually, if we stick with, say, the first husband, first wife story, that the real question is, who does the land belong to? Who gets the farm? Who gets the means of production? And really, this law was a way of making sure that when the man's brother dies, half of the farm doesn't go off to someone else's family. That was what it was all about. So in a sense, it's not far-fetched to bundle the other possession, being the wife, in with the farm and the house and whatever as being part of it. And as part of all of that, I can imagine that Jesus is kind of saying, what are you people talking about? Hey, is you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. And then notice in verse 25 and verse 26, they've come in verse 18 and they've asked about this thing called the resurrection. There's a theological discussion they want to have with Jesus. In verse 18 and the verses follow, they say there is no resurrection. But in verse 25 and 26, Jesus doesn't talk about the resurrection. He talks about people rising from the dead. In verse 26, the dead being raised. Now there's something in that of just a hint back to that little boy, or the little girl rather. Jesus took her hand and raised her up. This is gospel writing in a sense as well. And so when you put our minds into it, Jesus is saying, hang on, there's something, resurrection is not just a post-death, post-kingdom of God theological concept. Sometimes resurrection is about being raised to life in the here and now. And you know what? God is not of the dead, but of the living. Verse 27.
I mean, it's a bit like the Transfiguration, where Moses and Elijah appeared as if they were actually there, and then they weren't. That they are really living people in a different kind.
Well, yeah, yes. But perhaps more than that, Ian, it's about the style of writing and looking for the places where we draw the meaning and what we draw from the reading. So we could look at this and wonder, what does this teach us about heaven? What does it teach us about this place we're going to go to one day when we die? And actually, in verse 25, it tells us that people are not married in heaven. That's what it says. When they rise from the dead, they neither marry or given in marriage, but they're like angels in heaven. Angels in heaven are not married, So, but that might be taking the wrong thing out of it, because this is not a science book. This is gospel writing, trying to teach us, what does it mean to follow Jesus? What is God like? And so, yeah, that's why there's like these similarities in the ways that we deal with the text. And Helen, you're quite right. Jesus is saying again, giving this implication that men and women are equal. That the woman with 7 husbands will not belong to anyone. And, just as not strangely, those 7 husbands are not going to belong to the wife. Yeah. It was a really important a point for the early church. And when you go and read Paul, actually in Mark's gospel, you see how much of the discipleship work is done by the woman, and they're at the foot of the cross and so on. But even as Paul spreads the gospel through the Roman Empire, it's so often the woman who are taking a leading role in the church. Despite the early church, the first 200 years of church, sort of kicking back against it and trying to write them out of the story as well. Yeah. Can we move on? So anyway, he has one more group that are coming to Jesus and questioning him and trying to catch him up. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that Jesus answered them well, the scribe, he asked him, which commandment is the first of all? And Jesus answered, the first is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Just stop there for a moment. That's the Shema, Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 and what follows. And I mean, that's the really standard text that lies at the heart of Israel, of Jewish faith. So that's the textbook answer that Jesus has given. But he goes on, verse 31, and he says, the second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So what has Jesus done? He's put those two commandments actually on an equal pegging. He said they're the same, right? What does the first one say? The first one says, love your God, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, okay? And the second one says, actually, love is something that is expressed in the way that we deal with the people around us. Remember Jesus saying it's about mercy, not sacrifice, or not sacrifices. It's not just about your relationship with God. It's also about how you are merciful and loving to the people around you. And Jesus ties those two things together, always Mark and Jesus tie them together. And the scribe, reading on, the scribe said to him, you're right, teacher, you've truly said that he is one, and beside him there is no other. And to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. This is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. Mercy, not sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And after that, no one dared to ask him any questions.
Well, I've preached on
Anything
that
else?
passage.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I've preached on that passage. I've sort of run the two commandments together, and there was a great deal of overlap between them. That one very good way to love God is to love your fellow people.
In fact, we could stretch it further. I don't think it's stretching at all to say you cannot love God unless you love your fellow people. In fact, actually, how do I show my love for God? I show it by loving other people. Yeah. At the heart of, I mean, there are all kinds of texts that come to mind at the moment, but at the heart of the story is, at the heart of the gospel story is the fact that God loved the world so much that he came and became a part of it to show us how to express that love. So it wasn't just a me in my small corner. Yeah. So I realize I didn't have that on the screen for you, but I'm sure you could follow it as I read it. Anything else you want to bring out or notice in the passage?
What was the purpose of the question? Was the scribe trying to show how much he knew? Was he seeking information about Jesus from Jesus? Or is this another way of trying to trip Jesus up?
I'm not sure. What do you think?
I think in this instance, it was a genuine question to Jesus rather than an attempt to trap him and trick him, because the scribe had noticed how Jesus had given a good answer.
Right. Yeah, I think that's quite possible. It was really a sort of common scribal interaction to share a debate about what is the greatest commandment. So he's perhaps in some ways cozying up to Jesus and kind of saying, you know, let's have this conversation sort of as equals. And Jesus at the end of the story says to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. It kind of approves the understanding that he shows in the passage. Yeah.
It comes across to me as if the man thinks, oh, I wonder if Jesus thinks like I do. And
Yeah.
and it's a really good counterbalance to all of the attacks on Jesus. We don't very often get affirmations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think this is the first time those two particular commandments were put together side by side?
I don't know.
We have no evidence either way as to whether anybody else has ever said that. But yeah.
So I'm going to share screen with you and we're going to move on. So reading from verse 35, while Jesus was teaching in the temple, he said, how can the scribes say that the Messiah is the son of David? David himself, by the Holy Spirit, declared, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. David himself calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? And the large crowd were listening to him with delight. I'll stop there. So we don't need to go into that. It's kind of this sort of play on words, and there's this argument again. Son of David, white horse Messiah, or son of man, suffering servant Messiah? How can he be Lord and son, the same thing at the same time? But let's go on. As he taught, Jesus said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearances, they say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. What do you make of that? There it is.
It's not how you look, it's what you do that matters.
Absolutely. It's not how you look, it's what you do. The scribes had a reputation of looking good. And so if a lady became widowed, she of course couldn't handle her own property as a woman. So often what would happen was that the scribes would say, well, let me help you, let me look after you. And they were known to take their cut and whatever. They want to walk around in long robes, be greeted with respect in the marketplace, have the best seats, but they devour the widows' houses. That's the thing you need to notice. It's not how they look, it's what they do. How they look, what they do means, verse 40, they will receive the greater condemnation.
I'm looking at the full section that we've been through tonight, where you get a group that ask a question to try and trap Jesus, and then Jesus starts to teach against them. And I'm just wondering if here again, the scribe asks the question about the first commandment, and now Jesus is turning onto the scribes. He's warning the people against the scribes.
So Jesus first warned the people against the scribes in chapter 2, I think. Okay, and there was that a conversation there about the man who was raised to life, the paralyzed man who was put back on his feet. So this is not a new conversation. It's not a new confrontation in that sense. It's been an ongoing thing. What's interesting in the previous story, perhaps the thing that is missing in the previous story is this: Jesus doesn't say to the scribe, you're close to the kingdom, come and follow me. He doesn't say to the scribe, you're nearly on the way, come and join me. As almost as if this story links with that one, and that it's almost as if his scribalness, his being a scribe, disqualifies him, even though he understands with his head. Is he still devouring the widows' houses? It's not what's on the outside. Who put that so nicely for us? It's not about walking around in long robes or how people greet you with respect or the best seats in the synagogue, places of honor, long prayers or that sort of thing. It's about what you do. It's not sacrifices, it's mercy. Yeah?
It's no wonder that the crowd listened to him with delight, because they muttered about their religious leaders and secular leaders. But Jesus comes along shouting about it, and I can imagine them going, get in there. And is it important that this is all in the temple? Up to now, he's been shouting at them in the countryside, but here he's shouting at them in the temple. So the crowd are united.
Yeah. So they're in the temple.
And yet, in the first story of the scribe knows the right answer, and Mark lets the scribe give the answer, doesn't get Jesus giving the answer. And perhaps there's an unspoken thought there that if only you studied your history and your scripture correctly, you will understand who I am. And you, the scribe who has that understanding, is a very unusual scribe, because we all know what the rest of them are like.
Possibly. I don't. Yeah, it's possible. I do think he's. I don't think Mark puts enough. If Mark was wanting us to recognize that this was a really good scribe, he's different to all the others, I think he would have made more of it in the story. I think there's probably more in the fact that actually he kind of knows, he has the answers, he's a good theologian, but is he doing it right? In the Eastern churches, in the Eastern Orthodox churches, theologians are not those who have the theological knowledge. They're the people who live in the right kind of way. In Western churches, we tend to think theology is something you study out of a book. But in Eastern churches, they tend to say theology has to do with the way that you live your life. Let's go on. Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowds putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which were worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything that she had and all that she had to live on. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings. And Jesus asked him, do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left there upon another. All of them will be thrown down. What do you see in the text that might help us understand that might help us understand what Jesus thinks or Mark thinks of this woman putting 2 small copper coins into the treasury?
It's not the temple, it's the attitude of the heart.
In the text, Jenny.
There's an emphasis on huge, large, whether it's money or whether it's stone.
Okay, yeah.
The fact that Jesus watched them.
Where was he watching them from, Anne?
Putting money opposite the treasury in the temple.
Okay, put your gospel hat on, where was he sitting?
Opposite the treasury.
Opposite the treasury. So is Mark painting a picture of, I don't know if you can see me, but of the treasury is here and Jesus is not here, Jesus is over here. Opposite and opposed are related words. I know we've always heard this passage as, man, what a good poor widow this is, and all of you sitting in the congregation today should follow her lead and put in an extra big check this Sunday. But I'm really not sure that that is really accurate to what he did.
Is it that Jesus is opposed to what's happening and he's having a go at authority again? It's not about her at all, it's about them.
Well, I think it is about her, but I'm wondering if she's not a victim in a sense, a victim of the temple that has all of these great buildings, these great stones, all of that. Apparently the doors in the temple, was it Josephus who described them as being so highly polished with gold that when the sun shone on them, you just couldn't look at them. It was just such a bright reflection. There's so much wealth in this temple, and yet the temple takes from this widow the last, you can call it the last 2 small copper coins, but actually it's more than that. It's the last money that she had to live on. It's taken that insignificant amount that was everything to this woman and taken it from her so that they can gold plate the hinge on the door, maybe. I don't know why.
I think it's
Was this voluntary giving, or did she resent it?
No, I don't think there's any reason to think it's not voluntary. And there's nothing in the story to tell us she resents it.
I think it brings down to the quality of the worship. She comes to worship in the temple and she gives her all.
That's
And
how we always preach it. Yeah, we always preach that, don't we?
And the others, well, they come and they give out of their abundance, so it's there's no real challenge for them, but she comes because that's how much she loves her God.
But it's
I wonder if we need to.
Sorry.
I wonder if we need to think of the context of Mark's writing, that he's writing for a church many years after the event. And I'm wondering if he's having the same problem that Paul had with one or two of his churches, where the rich people within the church were lording it over the poor. They were taking the high seats in communion. They were having the meals before the poor were even arriving. And I'm wondering whether, in a sense, this is Mark writing to his church and saying, our responsibility is to give like this lady, to care for these people.
So this wasn't secretive giving then? Everyone could see what everybody was putting in the treasury?
Oh, yes, certainly.
It seems a little bit wrong.
Right, yeah.
Is it not that Jesus was away from the treasury, opposite the treasury, that it's another one of these things of trying to show what the kingdom is going to be like? The kingdom's not going to be concerned with the riches of the temple and this sort of thing. It's going to be a different kingdom, and you're back to the kingdom of love and mercy.
Yeah, very much so. It's the temple should not be taking money from someone like this. I mean, this is, to put an expectation on someone that in order to be a proper Jew, she had to give money to the temple when the temple's got so much already. It's, I mean, we're back to capitalism, aren't we?
So, I mean, Sharon's written something good in the chat, and so has Helen, and absolutely what Jenny has said. So one more person.
Are you actually saying then that it is not right for the poor to give? If you're poor, you don't have to give? Surely that can't be right. The poor want to give.
No one has to give. No one has to give, but absolutely not. I'm not trying to remove any form of worship from the poor or anyone else. But I think this smacks of a system that is perhaps a little bit abusive. And I'd say to anyone that if you don't know how you're going to make it to the end of the month, you probably shouldn't be putting your last money into the collection. I mean, that just doesn't sound right to me.
In terms of the sacrifices, the rich could bring anything that they wanted to bring, but the poor had to buy from those who were surcharging,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's all the same thing, surely.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's really easy for someone to give out of their abundance. And you know, you've heard the stories over the COVID period of how the top 10 people in the world, their wealth has increased by X amount, which is actually enough to solve the health problems of the world. And you know, if they were to give £1 million to COVID research, everyone would say, oh, that's wonderful. But actually, have they really given anything? I'm going to move on because I know two things. One, I think I've planted enough thinking around it that you will look at the text differently and question it. And I don't expect everything that we've learned for the last 40 years in church to change in 5 minutes. But I think there's enough in that text for us to ask, hey, hang on, maybe there's more to it than I saw the first time round. So I'm going to read from verse 13 then, 13 verse 1. Okay, but this is all one story. It's one story that goes back to the guy who gave a good answer to Jesus, eating widows' houses, 2 coins, copper coins, which are worth a penny. As they come out of the temple, one of the disciples says to Jesus, man, Jesus, what large stones, what large buildings, this is magnificent. Jesus says, do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, all will be thrown down. And when he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him, tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign that these things are about to be accomplished? I'm going to stop there just for a moment. Jesus says, these magnificent buildings, some of the greatest buildings in the world at the time, one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world, these absolutely astounding buildings that are backed up, that people come from all over to see. Jesus says they're not going to stand. How does he know that? Can't hear you if you're talking.
Is there any prophecies in the Old Testament about this then that he might have called back to?
No, I don't think so. I might be wrong. I don't think so.
I said because all buildings pass away.
All empires go.
All empires go, Sharon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because everything in creation that is built on injustice cannot survive. And you can call it the temple, you can call it the Roman Empire, you can call it Nazi Germany, you can call it apartheid South Africa, you can call it, are we talking about capitalism again? Anything that is not built on justice will not survive. And history has shown us that.
It's a bit of Daniel, isn't it?
Say, Rachel?
The prophet Daniel.
Oh, is
the
okay.
Empires, the figure, you know, it's the like instability, like you said, of it all. Sorry.
All right, when he has that vision of all the nations fighting with each other. Is that what you're talking about?
It's the figure that was in a child book I had when I was a kid, of the figure of the empires in Daniel. And then the last empire is made of stone, clay and stone. it's all fragile. Sorry. I'd
Yeah,
have to go
I mean, that's exactly right. And so no matter where it comes from, if you know it's built on injustice, like Jesus, you can say it's not going to survive.
This temple wasn't even finished, was it, at this point?
It was just about finished. That's what Jesus said. I don't know if they were still building it.
Is Jesus not changing the locale? Is he not changing the location of the temple from a building that is built, like you said, from injustice, but into the heart of the people, that he is the temple, that
Right.
he is going to be the temple that God has built, and that we are going to be part of that temple, and that is where we need to focus on. It's very much what was said earlier. It's what we do rather than what we appear like.
Right. So we spoke about this a little bit last week, in a sense, where there was this condemnation of the temple and saying that it's not producing the fruit that it's supposed to produce. And then Jesus says, the disciples looked at Jesus quite worried, and they say, but if there's no temple, how are our sins going to be forgiven? And Jesus says to them, you forgive. It becomes your role in this new community to be the people who are forgiving. You are the place where God will be found in the world. And God doesn't have to be tied into this temple or that temple in Jerusalem.
Yes, it actually happened a few decades later, didn't it? The temple was destroyed. So
Mark's gospel was probably written possibly in the late 50s,
Before the occurrence.
1950s. The year
Before the
58,
occurrence,
59,
okay.
something like that. The temple was destroyed by 66. So it hadn't happened yet, but it wasn't even a decade from here that it happened.
Is there a reference here to the walls of Jericho? No matter how big and strong they appear to be, they'll still come tumbling down.
Yeah, it's the same image. Yeah. So, chapter 13, we've been talking about gospel writing. I've got 4 minutes plus 2 minutes. I've got chapter 13 is not written as gospel writing. Chapter 13 is actually apocalyptic writing. You see, it's slightly different. We'll talk about stars, there's big plays on light and dark and powers and that sort of thing. And it was kind of the language that they would use when they were talking about, if you like, the end times or the judgment of God that was coming, that sort of thing. And it painted this picture of a very turbulent time during which the transition to God's ways was happening, and the rest of the world was kicking and screaming and saying, no, not this, we don't want this, we don't want justice, we don't want love, we don't want kindness. And so that's what's happening in chapter 13. As Mark is writing this, Mark's community in the year 58 or wherever it is, it actually reflects what's happening in their world as well. Okay, because the Jewish-Roman War of the late 60s is the background to the text, and the revolt has been launched in June 66, and from there it rapidly grew to the neighboring provinces. In November, the Romans sent their forces from Syria. They marched on Jerusalem to put down the revolt with massive force. As the Romans would, they would have just destroyed, smashed, burnt everything. And when that was about to happen, there was political trouble in Rome. And so the forces all got withdrawn. And everyone got, the big leaders all got taken back to Rome. And Jerusalem just breathed a sigh of relief. And when everything sort of sorted itself out in Rome, of course, the next job was to sort out Jerusalem. And again, what happened? There was heroic Jewish resistance, but eventually Vespasian takes control of Perea, Galilee, and Western Judea very quickly. By June 68, he's on the verge of besieging Jerusalem, and Nero dies. And Vespasian is called back to Rome, potentially the new emperor, and the Jewish resistance gets a reprieve. Wow, God is good. Look, God has saved us all of these times, all of this way. If you are a godly Jew, they're saying, come and join the resistance, take up arms and fight. Make sure that Rome never gets its way again. Okay, God is good. And still, everyone knows that actually Rome is coming back. The final hour is coming, and it did. And Vespasian did become emperor, and he sent Titus to finish off the Palestinian rebels. And the siege of Jerusalem began in April 70. 5 months later, it fell, it was ransacked, the temple was burnt to the ground. But in that little grace period, that sort of 18 months from 69 to when the Roman forces under Titus arrived, the Jewish resistance really believed that God had intervened on their behalf. And the rebels supporters started going through Palestine, calling the faithful to Armageddon, if you like, to the final battle, calling upon the tradition that Israel was this world leader and that Son of David, I promise you, this messianic age is coming, and their leaders and messiahs of all kinds, all true Jews must come to the battle of Jerusalem. Chapter 13, among other things, verses 14 to 23, he says, when you see this desolating sacrilege set up where it shouldn't be in the temple, then, he doesn't say, then come and fight. He says, run away. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. No one who's on the housetop must go back into the house to take anything away. The one in the field mustn't turn back to get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing infants. Pray in those days, pray that it may not be in winter, for in those days there will be suffering and pain. But notice that there's this message that Mark's readers, first readers, would have heard and said, it's not for us to defend Jerusalem with weapons and violence or whatever. It's us to follow the Prince of Peace. It's us to follow the right Messiah, if you like, the Son of Man Messiah. And in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from its heavens. The powers in the heavens will be shaken. There's all the images of power, and the world is so disturbed. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in glory with great power and glory. I promise you I'm almost done. Verse 28, from the fig tree, learn its lessons. As soon as it becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Look for the signs. You know then that these things are about to happen. But about the day or the hour or the time, no one knows. No one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son. But stay alert. Keep your mind open. Keep looking and interpreting. Where is God in this? What is Jesus doing? Where is the Spirit moving? What is just? What is fair? Where would the Son of Man be calling us to go? Where would the Son of David be asking us to go? Stay awake, for you do not know when the time will come, the evening or midnight or cockcrow at dawn, or else you might find that you're asleep when he comes suddenly. What I say to you, I say to everyone, stay alert. Can I close in prayer? Gracious God, for your word, we thank you. For the call on our lives, we thank you even more. And for the assurance that you will put us on our feet and take us by our hand and open our eyes and open our ears and allow us to share in the work that you're doing. We offer ourselves in response. Amen. So the meeting details for tomorrow are somewhere in our very long chat of this evening. I'm dying to go and read through it all. I'm afraid I can't read it all, but I will read it all. So the comments for the